refresh, the host has to start it, so that's the only
Well,
thing.
that is the
Okay, right.
that's the host
Yeah,
login.
that is the host login.
So
Right.
I don't know why.
One camera,
Is she
please.
in a meeting already? Is that the joke already?
In a Zoom meeting.
Yeah. So it looks to me. Do they have that link open for their meetings upstairs?
Oh. Okay.
So does that mean it's already kind of
Okay. Can you
open?
give them a link to join on upstairs?
Yeah. Well.
And to the stream.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us here. Can I just have your attention, just some general safety information before we start. Just take note of the emergency exits. They're along that side, but also here and at the back. And just to be aware, the event is streamed live, so if everyone can just switch their phones off or put them to silent at least. And anyone who's present can be part of the record. Just for those of you listening and observing this meeting, it's silence at all times. If you need to leave the room, just do so quietly. There's members of the policing authority staff in the room, so if you need any assistance, just ask them. And as usual, today's engagement is between the authority and the Garda Commissioner, so the audience are present to observe. There's no opportunity for anyone other than the authority members to participate in the meeting. And thank you very much, and over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Helen. Fáilteoibh go dtí an cruinniú seo den údaras póilíneachta in réadátha cuid den sracruinithe atá reachtáil ag an údaras fud na tíre. Onas gombeach tuiscint níos fearr, níos cuimsithe, níos daine a gcuin an dúshlán atá ribh an Garda Síochána agus an éilimh atá seirbhís póilíneachta ag an am seo. Is deis doing cur leis an ólas agus an tuiscint atá going agus ar nó doing deis eile doing teangabhaile ana leis a bobal agus an nearcha siúda áil cuma cuasaí áitiúla. You're very welcome to this meeting of the Policing Authority in Drogheda, one of a continuing series of our meetings which are being held around the country. A facility that wasn't available to us during the pandemic, but which we are very happy to be able to embark upon. Again, I beg your pardon. Red means go, green means stop. It's the new logic. So we're very happy to be in Drogheda and which take the opportunity to express thanks to those community representatives we met yesterday, and also to the Garda Síochána colleagues who met Chief Superintendent McGovern and Superintendent Waters and other colleagues here in Drogheda. It has been a very valuable opportunity for us to get a deeper understanding of policing and community issues in this area and in this town or city, as I saw leaving the railway station. The first item on the agenda this afternoon is the issue of responding to local policing challenges, and we're going to begin with a brief introduction from Chief Superintendent Alan McGovern. So over to you, Alan.
Red means go. That's right. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for the opportunity to present, and you're all very welcome to Drogheda. I have a number of slides, just a small few slides, to give a brief overview of local policing challenges, and they are broken into drug-related crime and intimidation, responding to children and young people in the community, and opportunity and effectiveness of multi-agency working. And I will be specifically focusing on Drogheda for the purpose of this presentation. Drogheda has come through some challenging times, and in order to combat organised crime gangs, the Commissioner established Operation Stratus with a primary focus on targeting and disbanding organised crime in the Drogheda area. This was a targeted approach which was supported by Garda units on a divisional, regional and a national level. Superintendent Waters and his drugs unit in Drogheda developed a strategy focusing on raising awareness of key people involved in the distribution of drugs in the area, taking action with focused operations to disrupt this criminality and analysing results to ensure forward planning and constant disruption. In terms of results, we have over 1,000 drug incidents detected under Operation Stratus. Over €6 million worth of drugs have been taken off our streets. Organised crime gangs have been dismantled. We have seized firearms, ammunition, pipe bombs and assets. Over 500 persons are before the courts. Since 2019, our detection rates for cultivation and manufacturing of controlled drugs is up 550%. Our detection rates for the possession of drugs for sale and supply is up 30%. And our detection rate for importation of controlled drugs is up 200%. And since 2019, our detection for money laundering offences are up 1,700%. In relation to drug-related intimidation, we have made significant progress in this area. Threats are made by drug dealers and they can vary. They can include verbal threats, threats to damage a home or property, and threats to commit violence. We encourage people to come to us where a threat has been made, and the Commissioner has appointed a dedicated inspector in every Garda division to respond to the needs of people experiencing drug-related intimidation. Every single case is different, but all cases are treated with the utmost confidentiality. We work very closely with the North Eastern Region Drugs and Alcohol Task Force in relation to the DRIVE initiative, which stands for Drugs-Related Intimidation and Violence Engagement. This offers support to victims of drug-related intimidation, and I'm pleased to say that with the support of the Drogheda Implementation Board, a new coordinator is soon to be appointed and will be based here in Drogheda. Developing trust within the community and with other agencies has been a key factor for us in terms of encouraging victims to come forward. We've had successful convictions in relation to drug-related intimidation, and our detections and prosecutions to date have also encouraged people to come forward when they see that those who try to cause serious harm within the community are not untouchable and will be brought before the courts. We have also raised awareness by highlighting the available supports through the media, by making presentations on drug-related intimidation to schools and teachers across Louth at JPC meetings, with sports clubs and with other agencies and NGOs in various public settings. We have an excellent relationship with the young people in our community, and the next few slides will highlight some of those initiatives we're involved in order to develop that relationship. A schools programme is delivered to primary and secondary schools and includes engagement of young people in relation to personal safety, drugs misuse, cyberbullying, vandalism and road safety. Our cycle safety clinics have proven to be very popular, and they're delivered by our community engagement Gardaí at clinics in local schools. We also use our clinics to link in with our local cycling clubs and Road Safety Authority to distribute safety equipment. Our Teenagers in Gardaí programme, referred to as TAG, is delivered by our juvenile liaison officers and project staff in the 2 youth diversion projects in Drogheda. The TAG programme is a 6-week programme which focuses on young people's rights, public order, drugs and searches, victim empathy, and finishes with a visit to Drogheda Garda Station and a graduation. Late night leagues are also facilitated by community Gardaí, juvenile liaison officers and the local football club, where we have summer and winter leagues with over 120 young people taking part. We recently launched our Garda Youth Awards, where we formally recognised young people for their outstanding contribution to our community, and we've also taken 45 transition year students annually for work experience, which includes visits to our national support services. We meet with third level students at our Drogheda Institute of Further Education and Campus Watch, where we have crime prevention stands and recruitment stands to encourage young people to consider a career within Síochána. We are working closely with our National Community Engagement Bureau and the University of Limerick, using the academic knowledge gained in the Greentown study in a programme targeting criminal networks locally and the use of children in criminal enterprise. As I move on to talk about opportunity and effectiveness of multi-agency working, I have to mention the Drogheda Implementation Board, who really epitomise the powerful impact a multi-agency approach can have within a community. Drogheda Implementation Board is made up of various agencies and community representatives, and has provided opportunities to connect, support and strengthen services in Drogheda, dealing with issues in a coordinated and structured way. The Minister for Justice has said that the Implementation Board provides an example of how we can build stronger, safer communities, and I will show a very short video clip at the end of the presentation which will look at the effectiveness of working together with other agencies and community groups. We work in partnership with many agencies, including the Probation Service, the Local Authority, the HSE, TUSLA, the LMETB, Loud Leader Partnership, the Red Door and various community representatives. We have an excellent working relationship with the court services and the probation services, and our drugs court has been a big success in Drogheda, where a person is given an opportunity by the judge to prove they can move away from drug-related crime. We are also very close to implementing JARC, which stands for Joint Agency Responding to Crime, which will specifically focus on drug-related issues, and we're working very closely with the Probationary Service, the Prison Service and Drogheda Implementation Board on that. Our relationship with the business community has been enhanced through joint initiatives such as Ask for Angela, where we got together with Drogheda Implementation Board and joined forces with the Irish Vintners Association, the Taxi Federation and the Irish Restaurants Association to launch Ask for Angela, which is designed to keep people safe who may be in a vulnerable situation. Our strong relationship with the business community was formally recognised recently when our community engagement unit were awarded the Best Not-for-Profit Award by the Drogheda District Chamber to acknowledge their contribution in keeping people safe and making Drogheda a more attractive place to live and do business. So the next slide shows the difference between where we were and where we are. And if we look at the left-hand side, we can see thousands of people marching, and this was a protest in relation to organised crime in the area and the fear that was being felt throughout the community. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see our centenary march last November, where we marched with the people of Drogheda through the very same streets to recognise 100 years of policing our great community. This is indicative of how far we've come and where we want to go, And if I could finish the presentation with a brief video on the next slide, which was developed by the Drogheda Implementation Board and captures much of what I have said, but in a more concise manner.
Drogheda was going through difficult times in relation to the emergence of organised crime gangs, unprecedented levels of violence and antisocial behaviour. A knock-on effect from this type of criminal behaviour is that it led to a sense of fear within the community, and this wasn't just impacting negatively on members of the community, also having a negative impact on its economic and social fabric. As a result of the investment into policing, many of those responsible have now been brought to justice or are in the process of being brought to justice. This investment enabled us to establish Operation Stratus, which targeted organised crime in the area. Under Operation Stratus, we have almost 1,000 drug incidents detected, taking a total of over €6 million worth of drugs off our streets. We detected and dismantled organised crime gangs, seized firearms, ammunition and pipe bombs. We have over 500 persons before the courts in respect of drug-related offences, and we have initiated a total of 18 money laundering prosecutions to date. Proactive enforcement of the law from our drugs unit and Garda in Drogheda has seen visible reductions in crime and overall antisocial behaviour, making Drogheda a more attractive place to live and do business. Working with the Drogheda Implementation Board has helped to give us a focus on what the community needs. Investment in our community policing team has allowed us to contribute in a major way to enhancing the lives of the people of Drogheda. This has helped us as an organisation to build trust and decrease fear amongst the community, in addition to developing a spirit of collegiality amongst partner agencies which has benefited Drogheda community as a whole. Our community policing team was recently described on a national level as the benchmark for community policing across the country, and this year they were proud winners of the Best Not-for-Profit at the 2022 Drogheda and District Business Chamber Awards.
So to conclude, I just want to thank again the Policing Authority and the Commissioner for the opportunity to speak. I want to thank the people of Drogheda for their trust, patience and their continued support, and we'll take any questions now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent McGovern. And I'm now going to ask Dr. Moling Ryan to lead out in the questioning in this area. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Our engagement with Drogheda really has been part of our engagement with communities around the country. This is our fourth of 6 potential engagements with communities, and we're interested in really the engagement of Garda Síochána with communities, and particularly communities, where there are significant challenges. And our executive have been engaging with Drogheda for quite some time, just to get some insight in relation to the developments within this urban area. We've had the benefit yesterday of engaging ourselves as an authority with community groups, and also with Garda Síochána, with Assistant Commissioner Richardson. We had the Chief Superintendent Waters, Detective Inspector McCabe. We had the JLO. And we really got an insight into what we feel is a remarkable journey, quite a remarkable journey, and a hugely interesting one. And one of the things that we'll be certainly exploring over the next couple of minutes is firstly the unique elements of this journey, and also the potential application for elsewhere, and how the Gardaí anticipate taking the lessons from this and reflecting on whether the lessons can be applied elsewhere with the type of success that's been achieved here, and what are the particular elements, and whether or not they can be replicated. So if I might start maybe just specifically in relation to Drogheda and this particular process. Drogheda was facing an absolute crisis situation which had got notable national headlines, seen as a major challenge to civic and political society, creating an environment within a community which was detrimental to way of life, to way of living, and how the expectations that people might have. But maybe as a starting point in relation to that process, be interested in terms of, maybe you might very briefly identify what you think were the unique elements associated with this particular process that led to the success that Chief Superintendent McGovern has just outlined. What were the elements that aren't reflected as a matter of course in other communities across the country, but it was your response to this particular crisis?
Thanks, Commissioner. Well, I suppose first of all, there's lots of great work being done in other communities and other divisions as well. I have to say that, and we're learning as well from other communities and other divisions. But I suppose from the beginning, I suppose it was important for us not to operate in silos, and I mean internally and externally. So at the start of Operation Strandos, we had everybody in the room, including our juvenile liaison officer, not just the drugs unit and the crime unit, our traffic unit, our regular units who were on the beat. Everybody was part of the solution to focus on it, but also externally, not operating in silos. And I touched on it there in relation to the importance of multi-agency working and working together with the community. It's not a problem we could have fixed on our own. It's not a problem we wanted to fix on our own. And, you know, I suppose we want to thank the community for their support in that.
There are still some unique elements. Sorry, the Commissioner might wish to respond, because I mean there was the application, and I'll come back to the implementation board in just a moment. But there was the application of significant resources, Garda resources, financial resources. Do you want to expand on that?
So I might say this has taken a number of years to get to the position that we're in now. And we were certainly, as you've set out yourself, there was certainly a crisis, and crisis just in terms of the number of incidents, but also then public confidence in the rule of law, and in Garda Síochána in late 18 going into 2019 as well. And I visited many times during that period and could see just the anxiety there was being expressed locally. There was an organisational response, and there was the movement to support the local division in terms of the national units, and that was a very concerted effort. And we did also recognise that there was a strong element of organised crime, and that had to be tackled as well. So on top of all the local initiatives, there was a national effort in terms of investigation and bringing individuals to justice, and in effect breaking up an organised crime gang, our gangs who were involved in a bloody feud with each other, which stretched really from North Dublin to here. So we recognised the scale of the problem, not entirely confined to Louth, but we did recognise it required an organisational response. I think the extra things that we saw here was actually the willingness to work together, to work in partnership, and also then the desire of the community for this to come to an end, and the desire of the community then to work with us as well. And Alan's corrective focus as well upon our work with young people, and going that extra mile to try and disrupt, in effect, patterns and cycles of offending behaviour, and in effect bringing more young people in towards a life of crime. So there's been great success, and I know there's a lot actually to learn from our experience here. But I would say at the start that there was a recognition of how bad this was, and then how far our response should be, not just at divisional level, but also at an organisational level. And Paula, who's with me, has been involved then with the community safety partnerships and their pilot, and then subsequent implementation. So there's a lot to learn from this that we would apply to the new community safety partnerships. And perhaps Paula could set out some of the organisational learning so that just the lessons from here aren't lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Maureen, so in terms of the three community safety partnership pilots as well that are ongoing and at various stages of implementation in Longford, Waterford and North Dublin, when we are working with the Department of Justice with those, Drogheda Implementation Board members also are at the meetings in terms of sharing of learning. We were designing reporting frameworks. We had last year the first ever cross-border community safety conference. So very much the alignment of what is happening here, what has happened, and sharing the lived experiences and the practices here from the multi-agency approach. We're very much looking at that, working closely with the department who are leading on the community safety partnerships, but learning from here. And we are seeing it, and the evaluation of the partnerships and the pilot will be with the department, but those who are at a further stage of development, we're seeing some of the results that we saw here, or seeing here, starting those shoots. We're starting to see those in the local community safety partnerships as well.
A couple of points occur to me. Firstly, if I might use a particular analogy, it takes a huge amount of commitment and resources to make the peace. It also takes a huge amount of commitment and resources to maintain the peace. And I think you've done some quite a remarkable job in terms of moving from a hugely difficult situation to where you are now. How are you going to maintain that level or enhance the position that you're currently in? The concern that we would have discussed with the Assistant Commissioner and with the Chief Superintendent and his colleagues is the issue of the potential diminution of resources that would be available within, particularly in the community side, which has been extraordinarily successful. What type of reassurance can you give us, can you give the community in Drogheda that the resources that will be applied from the Gardaí will be sufficiently, will be adequate to ensure that there's no potential for recurrence and the progress that you've made over the last period of time can be maintained?
Thank you. Well, there's a number of elements to that. There is always the risk of virulent organised crime gangs arising again, and that is an ongoing threat. And you're obviously aware the huge effort that we put in place in terms of countering the activities of organised crime gangs internationally, nationally, and also locally. All organised crime touches on a local community, and often touches on the communities least able to actually sustain the damage that they cause. So we're very aware of that. As an organisation, we're not stepping backwards. We see this as being entirely central to our mission and the ethos of how we go about our business. I think, in effect, we should be on the supply side of the issue and try and deal with things early. That's why we've maintained our focus around young people in particular, and our juvenile liaison process, our juvenile liaison officers, working closely then with community policing teams, but also supplying information for detectives and to deal with drugs and to deal with other crime. So there is an overall approach around the prevention of crime, but also then where it's happening, and where particularly there we see, really actors who can, through organised crime, who can have a really detrimental influence, dealing with that as quickly as we can. Certainly we would hope that we would never see the circumstances again which we did face here in 2018, 2019, but I'd also point to the circumstances in DMR in North Dublin in 16 and 17. And all of these we've faced down. There's always been an approach of, target the very worst for criminal justice sanction and then divert as many as you can, particularly young people, away, and that's through the juvenile liaison process. And that's both working at a local level but also a national level. And I think those strategies have been successful, and we do have evidence to show that as well. So they are worth pursuing, and we as an organisation are committed to that.
And are you going to be in a position in terms of provision of resources when there are significant demands for resources from all parts of the country, and in respect of potential initiatives from various sources? Are you going to be in a position to maintain a notable resource intensive position in Drogheda?
Well, we have made an undertaking in terms of just the resources we'll have here, but you're right. I've huge demand for Gardaí from every division, and in fact every unit, and it's part of our success that people want to see more of Gardaí, not less. But I have to think actually where the priorities are and where they can have actually the biggest impact. And a lot of that is around crime has its biggest impact along socioeconomic lines as well. And that's part of our reckoning in terms of where the problems are and then where Gardaí can have the best impact. But what the partnership approach has shown here is just the value of working with partners and maximising and find full leverage through all the resources that we apply to these problems. And the problems are beyond policing as well. As an organisation, you're well aware of where we are in terms of our overall resources. This year will be a year of growth. So despite the cessations, it'll still be a year of growth in terms of recruitment and individuals joining us as students in the Garda College. So that's very positive. But we have a challenge in a full employment economy, but we want to be a credible employer and employer of choice for people.
One of the consistent messages that we've received and we've had over the last couple of days, and indeed that the executive would have heard previously, is and I think Chief Superintendent McGovern mentioned it during the course of his presentation, is an agreement in relation to the extraordinary impact of the Drogheda Implementation Board. And I know from experience how difficult it is to bring that number of bodies and agencies together, and to have a situation not just in bringing them together, but to have them focused and committed to action, and not all actions that require financial input, but there were all of the potential parties that had the capacity to be able to contribute to a successful outcome were brought together, extremely well chaired, extremely well supported, and working extremely well. A concern was expressed by some of the people that we were talking to about the possible end date for the implementation board, with it being suggested that there might be an end date for the end of the year, which caused some concern, because that's then back to the capacity to be able to continue at the same pace and to do the same thing as you're currently doing.
Yeah, I suppose the Drogheda Implementation Board has been a great support for not just in Garda Síochána, also for other agencies as well. And it's important to highlight that. So we hope and envisage that it doesn't end, because there's more work to be done. But I suppose if it did happen, we're in a much better place than we are in terms of structures with the various agencies working together. But we hope that it doesn't come to an end.
Okay. Now, Assistant Commissioner Helen mentioned the community safety partnerships, and we note what the proposals are in relation to community safety partnerships. We've looked at the implementation board and how it's operated here, and its focus, clarity in relation to what it was seeking to do, and the particular actions that were required, and the absolute commitment by all the parties to those actions. And you mentioned, Assistant Commissioner Hillman, that you're looking at this, and you're looking at the potential learning for the implementation of the community safety partnerships. What is the learning that you've taken out of this, or what is the potential learning? I'm interested. Where I'm coming from is there a structure here and elsewhere for Garda Síochána at a national level to take the learnings from initiatives such as this and to apply them?
Certainly, yes. And I think when you look at also the proposals, in the Police and Security and Community Safety Bill, and with the creation of community safety partnerships, I think the learning is that as we all know around these tables, is that community safety is not the sole role of Garda Síochána, and actually when we have the right agencies at the right level with the commitment, actually we can resolve and actually move into that preventative stage as well, that we're not always reacting. So certainly it is very much looking at, for example, some of even the initiatives that Alan talked about already were actually in place in other parts of the country as well. So if you look at the Ask for Angela campaign, that actually is rolled out in various parts of the country. We brought it here, and we are looking at in other parts of the country as well. The See Something, Say Something that we are rolling out. So it's both learning from here and learning from other areas as well. But certainly I think the structure, and it is, for the biggest learning for me, the question you've asked me is, it's having the right agencies at the table.
I fully agree with you. My concern would be that you've got a successful initiative in Drogheda, and maybe as a consequence of, or not necessarily from the operating model and the independence of the individual chief supers, but there's the concern that I would have that the lessons learned and the potential application might not be consistently applied across the country, that there's a potential that certain people, certain chief superintendents who are interested, or certain inspectors or superintendents who might be interested, might go with it. Do you feel empowered, or do you feel that there's sufficient enthusiasm at the top level to ensure that the experience that we've got here will be put in place, not just in 2 or 3 or 4 areas where people might be interested and have the drive to put it in place, but that it might be applied right across the country?
I think with the future model, with the move from joint policing committees to community safety partnerships, local community safety partnerships, and the other structures around that, that's certainly the direction of travel and the road that we're on. I think it's also important that the principles are the same, but it is the agility to upscale it. And actually have it on a scale that what is required to respond in the policing needs of certain of each division, because not one size doesn't fit all. But I think very much the principles, and I think, and simply because of recruitment, so the community safety partnerships are at different stages of their development, and there are reasons for that because of recruitment. But if you look even very much at Longford and what's happening in Longford, it's there's a lot of similarities to here as well. And I think the coordinators, and they all meet outside of the forum between Drogheda and the 3 community safety partnership coordinators. They meet, they helped design that cross-border conference I mentioned. So there's that great sharing of information between agencies as well as...
Would you anticipate, for example, Assistant Commissioner, that perhaps on an annual basis that you'd have some process for monitoring what is happening right across the country, and that there's some process of taking those lessons, and maybe the lessons from, and you quite rightly identified the unique elements that are going to be associated with different communities. Everything is not going to be the same, but the lessons that were there, and in turn it's even possible that Drogheda might learn something from the experience in Longford and so on.
Certainly. I mean, I know from that cross-border conference this year, they're keen to have that every year as well. It was so successful, and learning from others, but also as well the role of the National Community Engagement Bureau, our role and my role in that regard about capturing that. So yes, I am, and again, there are lots of pockets of good work even already existing within the joint policing community framework as well, and we're taking that learning as well. But very much, I do think there is the learning from here and how we all learn from others, and we will share that.
And if I might finish on a local level, are we, in terms of where we're meeting in Drogheda, the sense that you have at this stage that the community now feels significantly safer than they would have felt a number of years ago, and that you feel that there's a greater confidence in the business community in the context of the environment as a consequence of all of these things that have been put in place. You're comfortable with that assessment?
Well, I suppose we're not saying the feud has gone away, but we're in a much better place now than where we were. I suppose we have the same challenges as any other town the size of Drogheda in terms of the day-to-day policing, public order, antisocial behaviour, for example. But certainly we're in a much better place than we were.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Moling. And before passing to Valerie, who's going to deal with another aspect of this topic, I wonder if I might pick up on something that Moling has mentioned, but from a very specific policing perspective, as opposed to from the possible linkages between the experience in Drogheda and the development of the community safety partnerships, which will come into being under the new legislation at some stage next year. Yesterday in our meetings with your colleagues, Commissioner, there was almost a litany of specific policing initiatives that had been implemented in Drogheda, and specific legal options exercised that seem to have had a significant impact in the process of limiting, disabling the capacity of organised crime gangs to do their nefarious business. And I wonder, are there steps that you are considering or that you might consider in terms of applying some of those across the country in terms of the policing initiatives that can be taken?
Well, most certainly. There's various actions, particularly around criminal justice investigation, and Alan highlighted the number of prosecutions around alleged money laundering offences, for instance. And that is actually a very good way into organised crime groups, beyond the work of the Criminal Assets Bureau, etc. And I'd also point out the number of local assessors that we'd have for criminal assets as well. So there's a menu of things that have been done here, both around community policing, but also then, as you point out, around investigative strategies and efforts. And that information is shared. There's both the regional AC here, who through her path, these matters would be discussed. But even beyond that, the good practice that has been found here has spread further, and there has been a marked increase in the number of files submitted to DPP around money laundering type offences, and that has proved to be very useful, together with the organised crime legislation that we have as well. So using the criminal law to its full against the various gangs that are out there has been a valuable tactic here. But together then, the various initiatives that have been set out are also replicated elsewhere as well. So overall, like, one complements the other, and it's right then we don't lose focus on the things which are entirely within our gift, you know. So investigative strategies are ours, and also our approach to community policing is ours as well.
It is striking to the authority that there is something different here that hasn't been felt in the same way in other communities with which the authority is engaged, where our outreach work has been done, and indeed where we've had public meetings. And I think that there may be material for reflection by all of us in that context, because undoubtedly there is something particular that has happened, that is happening in Drogheda, that has a tangible feel to it, even for those of us who are only visiting for a few days. But we will reflect further on that. I think Paul wants to ask one quick question before Valerie.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, just on the point that you were just discussing, Commissioner, around the money laundering prosecutions. I mean, in the slide that we saw earlier from Chief Superintendent McGovern, he showed us that there had been a 1,700% increase in this area in money laundering prosecutions.
Yeah, that's right, Commissioner, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that.
17.
17 was last year's total. So it's run from, I think, 1 to 17 in the space of 3 years.
So you're reasonably content that that taking that as one metric, that the progress that has been made here locally in relation to that area is also being matched nationally?
I know there's been a rise, but I don't think it's to that volume.
Yeah.
But certainly those who, if you look to divisions which might have similar profile around offend, not all do. There has been a marked increase around money laundering type prosecution. So, you know, if you're looking to the DMR Norths and DMR West, like that is a tactic which is certainly spread.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that on? It's on. First of all, thank you for the lovely warm welcome, warm in every sense, to Drogheda today. Beautiful day out there. And, you know, it's evident when you look at the town of Drogheda, first of all, how much Drogheda has grown in recent years, and I think we all know that. And I suppose as a result of that, your population, you have a very large young population compared to the national average, as I understand it. And I think you have a high proportion of maybe one-parent families, and apparently too a higher risk of deprivation based on the Public Deprivation Index, which the census uses. There are challenges there. And so I'm very interested in what's going on with the younger people and in keeping them safe. So, you know, we hear that, and you've talked about organised crime and the very serious end of organised crime and the violence incidents, etc. You've shown. We've heard in other divisions that organised crime gangs deliberately draw children and young people, and even very young children, into criminality and the drugs trade. So how have you ensured that your policing response has sought to keep children safe in that regard? Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And yes, I suppose in relation to Drogheda and from the presentations you'd have had, you've seen the active engagement by our community policing units, but also our juvenile liaison officers, and the initiatives, the fantastic initiatives that they've put in place to try and divert vulnerable children from the crime path and try and bring them back into, giving them something to hold on to be part of the community and wanting to be part of the community. And I think that is being replicated as well in relation to the policing, not only our community policing units, but throughout the whole units. And again, just because you're in a different unit doesn't mean that you're not going out and reaching out to those children. So lots of time we find that those children, while they may know the juvenile liaison officers or the community policing, local community police engagement team, they also reach out then to the drugs teams. They reach out to the other guards that have come into contact with them through these schemes, through the late night soccer leagues, through the sort of, those initiatives around,
And are you seeing
clubs.
evidence of young people being drawn into and being used to, as couriers, and the sort of anecdotal stories we hear in the media? Are you seeing evidence of that here in Drogheda?
Well, in Drogheda, obviously, we have to be careful in relation to making sure that that is being prevented in relation to it, so that we don't get to a point where there are young people being. Obviously, there's always vulnerable young people in all communities, and it's to reach out to them to ensure then that they are being intervened before they get to a point where they become so vulnerable that they may be, become subject to abuse such as that. So again, it's something that's very, very high on the members here, that are on their radar in relation to it, and reaching out. And, and again, that's that community feel, both from the success that Alan and his team is from, is that, people are willing to reach out and say, look, there is a vulnerable child here, there is vulnerable children going, and then there's a proactive approach, really, to ensuring that we can avoid situations like that.
And you described very well there, and we heard yesterday from your colleagues as well, some of the great outreach programmes that are going on. It makes me wonder, though, what about youngsters who fall through the cracks or don't reach those programmes? How does you work on them? If there are children who do, let's say, get into trouble, what's your process at that point? There was a mention, for example, of use of restorative caution process. Maybe could you tell us a little bit about that, and how? So when a child maybe gets into that area that could lead them eventually down the wrong, the path you don't want them to go, what do you do at that stage?
Well, again, there's several interventions that juvenile liaison officers can intervene in relation to. One of them, as you heard, was around the restorative caution, where that a child comes in contact with the victim of the crime, and they hear from the victim's perspective. And a lot of the time, people and young people in those situations don't realise the impact that their crime may have had, or that their actions may have had on somebody. And I think that's where that's quite it works in some places, may not work in other sort of situations, but when it is used, it is quite beneficial. And again, it's just maybe just giving a bit of realisation to that young person to say, well, my actions, I see now what that impact was, where I may not. And again, that's just one aspect of it, and one strand. That may work for one young person. It may not necessarily work for another person. But again, there's so many initiatives and so many goodwill out there, both from the community themselves and from the families of these young people that are vulnerable, to try and engage, to make sure that they don't go down a path that's going to lead them elsewhere. And I think it's that very much proactive and early intervention piece, and it's through the schools programme as well. So you have the community guards and the members on the beat going out, interacting with schools, going into schools, teaching the schools, and trying to bring that awareness. And it's also that trust that those young people have then in relation to it. And I know I mentioned yesterday in relation to, you see it tangibly when we have local people in the area now joining or wanting to join in Garda Síochána and actively trying to become part of the community.
I was going to actually ask you about that, and you mentioned the transition year programme, and you had 45 students. Do you see that growing further, the TY programme? How's that gone for you?
Yeah, and I might just pass over to Assistant Commissioner Helen, because obviously that's her forte in relation to the...
Because it's interesting that the two sides of this, it's not just about keeping children safe, that's a priority, but if you can also broaden your recruitment group, and diversify that further, you're hitting another benefit too. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Yes, definitely. And just to say, so in terms of that restorative justice work, so all the juvenile liaison officers receive training in regard to that. So it is a structure that they use routinely. And I'm pleased to say I've just been finishing the we're just finishing the 2022 youth diversion monitoring report. And there is a significant increase in the use of restorative caution. Again, it actually had decreased the previous year, but the reason for that was a lot of our sergeants had actually left. There was a reason. So if you look over the last 3 years, you'll actually see the decrease, but we're actually, just as we were finalising the report, we're just it'll be finalised very shortly. I'm pleased to say that there's that increase again. So it's something that in terms of their training, in terms of, and the retired Chief Superintendent Quinn was very passionate about that and actually led that in terms of the work and the culture within the Bureau at that time. So the JLOs, both here obviously in Drogheda, but right across the country, that is something that is routinely used by them. Yeah, in terms of transition year, yes, that has happened. It's going forward, built on what we had in terms of the internship as well. So the organisational learning from the internship, the diversity we saw with that, and I know myself and from colleagues, you know, everyone is very keen to bid as well and get that knowledge and that youthfulness and get that diversity of learning and thought. So it is something that is very much valued, and I know from those who did graduate as interns, you know, they very much keep in touch, and there's great, and hopefully for their future career paths, whether or not they join on Garda Síochána or have a different career path, but it has been very beneficial, I think, for them, but also for us as an organisation.
Okay, and of course you're not doing all this on your own. There significant work being done by community groups in the area as well. Could you tell us a little bit about the importance of the community groups working with Garda Síochána in the interest of the young people, and how that's panning out here in Drogheda? Well, local really. I think we want to hear about Drogheda, yeah.
So our community engagement team and our juvenile liaison officers have a magnificent relationship with the youth workers. We have 2 youth projects in Drogheda, the Cable project and the Vine project. But I suppose, and you've heard yesterday in relation to the schools as well, how important that is, and the sports clubs, and I suppose getting in there. And one of our initiatives that you heard yesterday in relation to the writing of a book, 600 young people contribute towards writing books. And I suppose when you spoke earlier on about people that might be falling between the cracks, I suppose we try and reach as many people as we can, and we do that with the help of the youth workers. And as I said, we have a great relationship with the youth workers in Drogheda. And
again, drawing on what Moline was asking too, do you think there are successes you have here in Drogheda in the area of youth that can give example to other parts of the country? Everybody has different initiatives. How do you share your successes?
So we share it with the Assistant Commissioner at regional PAFs. Our Chief Superintendents would discuss various initiatives, and then the Assistant Commissioner can bring it to a senior level, to the senior leadership team as well, to make sure it's not lost on a national level. And as I said earlier, we are also learning from other divisions and other communities from what they're doing well.
Commissioner, you said that there's evidence of success of the JLO and diversion programmes generally. How do you measure the success of, say, the JLO programme?
Well, again, I'll turn to Paula, but I think for us it's actually the number of young people who are successfully, in effect, diverted through engagement with the JLOs. And I think another element of the success for us, more difficult to measure, is just the engagement there is with the JLOs and the young people. It is seen to be, a very positive experience for the majority of young people who come through the programme. But Paula would have the figures just in terms of actual young people successfully diverted. Now, a group do go on to become recidivist offenders, but the proportion then that we successfully divert is greater. Thanks, Paula.
Yes, certainly over even recent years we have seen actually a slight decrease in the number of referrals coming in. It's decreased. Normally it used to be about 19,000 a year. It's down to just over really about 15 to 16,000 for the last few years, and that's even as we've come out of COVID. But certainly, you know, research has shown that, you know, the high number of young people that do not reoffend, that they're learning. And I think the structure is there's 105 youth diversion projects now that the department funds. So that's when you talked about then the local partnership, but the national partnership. So those structures are overseen by the Department of Justice. Now we are closely involved, but we're a partner along with others, both at local level and then at the national level in the national from the National Youth Diversion Bureau as well. And then we can, you know, we do look at obviously it's the consistency of approach with the number of the director who writes on, makes those decisions, and with some delegated responsibility to inspectors about that consistency of approach in terms of the decision making and the most appropriate, whether it's a conference, restorative justice, whatever the outcome is then for the appropriate circumstances of individual cases. And I think the other success is that as well, that from the partnership and the community policing teams and the JLOs is also the identification of those young people on the periphery as well. So there is some preventative work before, you know, as well, and some of those people will be involved in the projects, those who actually haven't offended.
In age terms, how young does it go, if you like, in terms of youth diversion programmes?
It's from 10 to 18.
Okay, yeah. And in the preventative work, do you go to the primary school level lower than under 10? Or?
Well, that would be part of our schools programme.
Okay.
So our schools, so there's our national schools programme. So we go into nursery schools, primary and then post-primary schools as well. So the schools programme is again developed in partnership with education, with the Department of Education.
Because in some work, you know, some work the authority did in terms of what we heard report, you know, there was evidence of children, you know, as young as creche ages having formed a negative perception of Gardaí due to personal experiences, which may have in fact been, I suppose, the actions might have been valid, but the child's perception of what's going on can be very negative. Have you any view on that in Drogheda in terms of very, very young children?
Well, in terms of Drogheda, I would refer back to Alan, but I think we did, and we read that, and I know the national unit had read that as well in the what we heard report, and I think that is just the importance of it's not just, and it's something we're looking at in the national unit. It's just not the number of schools visits; it's where the schools are, and it's in terms of those. So, are there other schools we could be going to more regularly, based on what you'd put in, what was in the report? So we're running that lens across, not just looking at numbers, but actually the schools and there are other schools perhaps that we could get further we should be given further attention to.
Okay, and young children obviously, unfortunately, can be exposed to crime in their own home, to violence in the home. Can you tell us, and moving away from the young people aspect, can you tell us generally how responsive is policing in Drogheda to domestic abuse and domestic violence and what's going on in that area?
So we're no different than any other large town, unfortunately, and I suppose our community engagement team do our domestic violence callbacks, and you know we make sure we maintain our figures at a high rate, and I suppose we are working again with the Drogheda Implementation Board. We're looking at various initiatives around domestic violence, where we're working with the business community. Something that I can't go into here, but it's something that you will see going forward in relation to a particular initiative that we're working on. And I suppose what we want is for victims to feel safe in coming forward to us. And I mentioned earlier on about trust and confidentiality, and I think that's very, very important for us to maintain that trust and to encourage people to come forward. And I suppose really when they see the successes that we have had, it may encourage people to come forward to say, right, we are listening to, when we go to the guards, they will listen to us.
And can you tell me about your Protective Services unit and how has that developed? Yeah,
so we have an excellent Protective Services unit, and they really helped us in terms of professionalism in relation to the victims of the most serious of crimes. And I suppose they're unfortunately they're a busy unit. They deal with some very, very sensitive matters, some very serious and senior investigators. So I suppose it gives that kind of a different avenue for people that don't necessarily meet the victim at the Garda station. They can meet him in a neutral venue, you know, so, and I suppose they're trained to the highest level.
Okay. Before I wrap up, maybe is there a message you'd like to send out to victims of abuse who may not have had the confidence to come forward? What should people do if they have
Please come forward and engage with us. Just make that initial call, make that initial move to come forward.
And what happens then?
Well, first of all, we will treat them with empathy. You know, there'll be no judgments. We're not going to rush into anything. We're there to listen to them first, listen to their story, and we'll take it from there. We won't be doing anything that they're not comfortable with.
Some people may have a fear that if they involve, you know, Garda Síochána in a situation in the home, that it then becomes much more serious and could have serious impact maybe on their children. And these may be you know, fears without basis, but they're fears that people have. And women can be slow in coming forward because they fear the damage to the family and wider repercussions. What reassurance can you give to people? Again, I mean, you've just been giving it, but would you like to repeat the assurance in terms of why and when and how people should come forward?
Yeah, again, we treat every case with the utmost of confidentiality and discretion when victims come forward. We would appeal to people to come forward.
Okay, I think that's all I have.
Can I just add to that? I was at the launch of the Women's Aid report for 2022. I think even beyond that, for a victim who doesn't feel they're able to come forward in Garda Síochána, we would say, you know, go to one of the NGOs, Women's Aid, or go to your solicitor, seek help, and at least begin the process by which you start to talk about this and disclose to others who then will assist you. It's not necessary that, you know, come to our door first, but if you are in danger, you know, you should most certainly ring 999 so we can respond immediately. But for those who and it is ultimately a very difficult choice for individuals, there are others who are there to help, but please make a report.
And you've actually raised another point that maybe again, back in the context of the young people in Drogheda, if there's a parent who fears their youngster is getting into trouble, but they don't want to get the child into trouble with the Gardaí, do you encourage people to interact with community groups? Or, you know, how does that pan out? It's this piece where, you know, you reach out, parents are trying to guide their kids in the right direction, but if something's going wrong, and there are people who don't necessarily want to raise their child, to bring the child to the Gardaí as you know.
Yeah, but I would point to all the other positive influences there is in Drogheda, but elsewhere, in terms of trying to get them engaged with people who actually will try and keep them on the right path. At some point or other, you know, we might actually have a very positive engagement through partnership working with them. It's not necessary that our engagement should necessarily be you know, a negative one, as might be seen in terms of enforcement. But if they don't want to come to us, like look around to see what other resources there are available. There's obviously sports clubs, youth clubs. We've set out all the various programs that we're engaged in, but that involves others as well. So it's not just necessary that they're interfacing with members of Garda Síochána.
I think that's a really important message for parents who are in that space of not knowing where to go to anticipate and avoid trouble ahead. Listen, I've probably used up all my time. Thank you very much. And again, thanks for the warm welcome to Drogheda.
Thank you, Valerie. And we recognise in the context of that last issue, and so we know, do you, that there are some people who may feel concerned that the very fact of making contact with the Garda Síochána or being seen to, being known to, would put them at risk. And what you've just said is really important in that context.
Can I just add to that, because even on the back of the What We Heard report, to think what our interaction with the community is and how we can try and normalise that, because in some places to interact with a member of Garda Síochána, to go to a station is seen to be an act which brings suspicion on an individual. So, you know, we have to think about getting beyond the station, in effect, into more everyday places where the interaction with us can be set in a more normal setting and everyday setting, no matter what it might be. It's part of the feedback we took from your own report, and it's also been repeated by local communities once we actually, well, we recognise what the problem is and then what the antidote to that might be.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I should say as well, in the context of the discussion that we've just heard in relation to the work of juvenile liaison officers, that we had a very comprehensive presentation yesterday from Garda Anita O'Shea, and it was clear that the work that she and her fellow JLOs do is much appreciated in the community, but also much appreciated by the Garda leadership here and in other parts of the country. Can we move now to broaden the focus of our consideration and look at national policing performance? And Paul is going to lead on this. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. There are two areas, Commissioner, that I'm going to ask about. The first one is in relation to the policing of protests, and there was some substantial discussion about this at the last authority meeting in May. And I just wondered if I could ask you how the situation has developed since then, both in terms of the number of protests that there have been in the last month or so and the nature of the response from Garda.
The last time we met, it was obviously just on really at a time of a lot of intense coverage of this issue. We had very bad incidents in the Mount Street area, and then that was also reflected in a number of other protests throughout Ireland around the placement of those seeking international protection in medium-term accommodation. I'm pleased to say that protest activity has been dealt with, but whilst at the same time we have facilitated the housing of those seeking international protection into what I presume is going to be medium-term accommodation for them. So, for instance, Santry and also Ballybrit in Galway, and there have been specific operations put in place, and those have been successful in terms of individuals being able to access that accommodation. By and large, without incident, there was one arrest at Ballybrit, and that's been dealt with by means of a report to the DPP. But beyond that, then the situation has certainly settled from our perspective. I appreciate on other agencies within government there still remains huge demand, but our understanding that the crisis in terms of individuals seeking accommodation, living rough on the streets, in effect, that has eased and abated to a considerable extent, and that there is actually accommodation available should individuals wish to avail of it as well. So the position is a good deal more positive, certainly from a policing perspective, but we do acknowledge the demands on others. But overall, there's over 50 various locations, even just within the Dublin metropolitan region, where individuals are now living in accommodation. And by and large, the great majority of the movement of those individuals in the housing happens without really any input from Garda Síochána. We're aware of it, and we keep a watching brief, obviously, around those locations to make sure things are okay. But by and large, you know, as of the moment, this is not a huge policing drain on our resources and for our partner. And obviously, then we will just await developments to see what happens next and respond accordingly. Investigations carry on in respect of the disorder and various incidents in the Mount Street area, and those investigations are active, and individuals again will be reported to the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Okay, thank you for that. And I mean, one of the concerns that I think we raised the last time, and that had also been voiced publicly by others, was a degree of a lack of clarity maybe about when the police would intervene, or a lack of consistency as between different incidents. And I know that in the interim, I think, or maybe just at the time of the last meeting, you issued some new guidance in relation to the policing of protests. And I just wonder, do you want to say a little bit about that guidance and how it has been received, or what effect it has had within the police?
Well, this in effect was the second edition, and there had been previous guidance issued in March by Deputy Commissioner, but in fact Dublin Metropolitan Region had issued weekly guidance since January. And I think hopefully it's clarified the situation for divisional officers, superintendents, etc., around the decision-making matrix that they need to apply. It's very difficult to prescribe for every situation, and in fact also the commanders on the ground do have a wide degree of discretion in how to deal with the matter in front of them. But it is very clear to us the unacceptable position that people in effect would be living in danger on the streets because of the failure to be able to provide or unable to access accommodation. So that places an extra impetus on us. So while facilitating protest, it can't be the detriment or to others' individuals' rights, and that includes the risk that some are in through the knock-on of not being able to access accommodation. So we're very aware of that. The guidance has been applied both at Santry and Ballybrit, and I think applied successfully. But again, we monitor that. Thank you for your feedback in respect to that document, and we've also received feedback from our own association, so we will probably do another iteration of the document in short term.
And are you satisfied? I mean, I know maybe, as you said, things have improved over the last short period of time, and that's obviously to be welcomed, but are you satisfied that in relation to the sorts of issues that we discussed previously, that your officers are now clear as to when they should intervene? I know it's difficult to be prescriptive and you can't plan for every eventuality, but while on the one hand, clearly you have a duty to try to facilitate peaceful protest, it is peaceful protest, and are you satisfied that guards are now clear as to when they should and indeed must intervene?
Well, protest peaceably, but you can protest peaceably and still be denying an individual their right, and that right then kicks in, as I say, has a knock-on effect in terms of actual individuals being exposed to danger. So there is a careful balance in respect of that, and now we recognise that there, and an obvious risk there is to those who ultimately then, if every accommodation was blocked off to them, who would have no option but in effect to be living rough, that's not acceptable, and it's not acceptable in terms of human rights or indeed public safety and crime prevention. So we therefore then are under duty and obligation to act, and I think that is clear. The calculus around this has changed following the disorder in Mount Street, and that is clear to the operational commanders as well. So again, I expect them to apply their discretion, but all of these incidents, very few of them are actually immediately spontaneous. There is time actually to consult, take direction, take advice, and then decide on the best strategy and tactics to apply on the evening, and that's exactly what's happened now on recent occasions.
Okay, thank you. If we can move on briefly to the issue of custody, you'll obviously be aware that there was the Garda Inspectorate report a couple of years ago, I think almost exactly 2 years ago, which delivered a whole series of recommendations to yourselves around the issue of custody. I think the plan was, from your point of view, that you were working to put together an implementation plan to respond to that Inspectorate report, and I just wondered if you could give us an update as to where that now stands.
So I received a draft implementation report on Monday, and I have it here in front of me. So again, sets out a very detailed programme in order for us to meet the inspection report, and then set forward really the strategy for custody in the organisation, probably for the next 10 to 20 years, because the capital expenditure required here is significant. So the course that we set over the next couple of years is actually one that has to be sustainable, and also be in a position that, and even to upscale in terms of demand as we meet population growth as well. So there's been a very thorough document put together. I have to, in effect, approve that through our senior leadership team meetings, and then when that happens, then that'll be shared.
Okay, and can I just clarify, does that also, so there was, I think, the implementation plan, which was a response to the recommendations of the inspectorate, but there was also then, I think, a new policy document around custody management.
Yes,
yeah, so
and that's part of the implementation plan,
okay.
and that's to be received in the Q3 and the Q4 of this year.
Okay.
But that's part of the action plan, implementation plan.
Okay. And just a secondary question in relation to the issue of custody. I mean, one of the interactions that we had with yourself, and we were very pleased that you agreed, was to share information with the authority in relation to GSOC referrals, for deaths in custody or post-custody and serious harm incidents.
Yes.
And I know that you're now doing that. When GSOC does come back following the investigation of those incidents and makes recommendations to yourselves, how are those dealt with internally? How are those prioritised?
They come through the normal channel in terms of communication, but they do come to me, and they are part of the recommendations tracker that we've talked about. So looking at, all recommendations coming into the organisation, and we prioritise them based on risk. Okay. So sometimes it's an individual case, sometimes it's systemic, and they are very open above and beyond the written recommendations on things that they think we should look at above and beyond that. Okay. If that makes sense, if they see a pattern.
And so you will, when you get those in, you'll determine, as you said, that this one may relate to a set of individual circumstances that are unlikely to be repeated, but this one may be more problematic in terms of custody management across the board.
Exactly, and because it's part of the recommendations tracker, we can actually look at it in conjunction with other recommendations that have been made to the organisation, for example, from the inspectorate, so that it gets joined up and considered that way.
Okay, that's me, Chair. Thank you very much.
Debbie is next.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to ask some questions on a couple of areas. The first is on roads policing, and the second is in relation to the reserve strategy. First of all, on roads policing, I mean, we have a significant number of people who die on the roads, and that has increased this year compared to last year. We have a decreasing number of detections in key areas, apart from the speeding. So the detections in relation to intoxicated driving, and that's with alcohol and drugs, I guess, on breath tests, on seat belts, and on the use of mobile phones, are all down this year compared to a similar period last year. And I know this year's stats are provisional, but they are up to the end of March, so that's 3 months ago. Can you tell us what your contribution is and what you're doing to decrease the number of deaths and serious injuries, and to increase the detections, because these events have significant impact on families and communities, and are really part of a sort of community safety package. So,
I acknowledge all that you say, and we do very much acknowledge the terrible trauma there is both.
Commissioner, sorry, can you?
Sorry. I acknowledge all you say, and indeed very much acknowledge the terrible trauma there is for families who either lose loved ones through road traffic collision, or indeed those seriously injured as well. This is an area of concern for us. It is an area where we have a part to play, along with others, in terms of road safety. And if I might turn just to Paula, just to set out just the various actions that we're taking in year to do our part around road safety and prevent accidents. Thank you, and
thank you, Commissioner. Yes, and just to
really reiterate and endorse what the Commissioner has said. As the Assistant Commissioner for Roads Policing, I and both the members of the Garda National Roads Policing Bureau, GNRPB, and many of our operational colleagues work closely and meet those groups who unfortunately have come together as families who have lost loved ones, and we see firsthand the impact. And having attended one of their services last year, and you see the numerous photographs of the people who have lost their lives, it's never lost on us the impact of road deaths and serious injury on families. You've asked two things then about what we're doing, and then about what are we going to do how are we going to increase performance. So if I first mention what are we doing, so very much we are working as one of the many partners in the government road safety strategy. And just yesterday we were meeting the Minister of Justice and Transport to talk about this as well, collaboratively and collectively, both ourselves in Garda Síochána, with the Road Safety Authority, TII, NTA, Medical Bureau of Road Safety, and many other partners that we work with in this area. And it is very much, as the Commissioner said, that collaborative approach, and I will come on to detection, but I think it is important to say that the safe systems approach also looks at things like safe roads and design, so how we look at engineering, how we actually prevent, how we look at where road deaths are happening, so both from the environment and from the education approach as well. And we have a strong education approach, whether it's formally through what we do in the schools programme, what we do through our Lifesaver programme that we're rolling out. It's a programme that can be used for many groups. It started in Limerick and we're rolling that out nationally as well. And plus also actually guards also given guidance to people that they stop, then through to enforcement. So very much those E's of environment, education and enforcement. We have 19, we own 19 of the actions on the road safety strategy that we are personally, individually responsible for, and we're also a partner in many of the other actions as well. So our commitment through the Road Safety Strategy Partnership Board that I'm the Vice Chair of, our commitment to deliver those multitude of actions to, in the collaborative approach, improve road safety. Now, to your specific question then about enforcement, which sits with ourselves, as the Assistant Commissioner with the national responsibility, I have that accountability for partnership working, for the development of policy for roads policing. Then the enforcement responsibility and operational responsibility then sits with regional assistant commissioners and regional divisional officers. So if I maybe explain some of the structures that we have to drive performance and give people the information they need to see how they are, how things are working in certain divisions and areas. So on a quarterly basis, it would used to be annually, but we moved it to quarterly. We issue a roads policing operational plan, and we purposely moved it to quarterly so that we could respond to trends that we are seeing on the roads as well. So in terms of that, it goes out quarterly, and that gives then each of the divisional officers the information about what will be the focus on enforcement for that week, and then the weekend. The weekend we normally focus on drink and drug driving, but during the week it's different lifesaver offences. So the roads policing operational plan is the quarterly plan. Underneath that then there's a monthly tasking and coordinating meeting that I chair. With each regional AC has nominated a chief superintendent or superintendent who attends on their behalf at that tasking and coordinating meeting at TCG. Also at that meeting is the chief superintendent in GNRPB. Now, at that meeting, we look at trends. We look at, for example, as we are, and we're seeing, we have some counties, unfortunately, this year, Mayo, Galway, Meath, Westmeath and Cork with significant high fatalities. So my colleague, Assistant Commissioner, they are looking at Northwest region and doing some very specific plans to what we're seeing there. But in terms of that meeting as well, we also give all the information and breakdown of performance on a national, a regional and a divisional basis.
Also, other divisional officers can get their key KPIs, the performance indicators, right down to an individual basis. So that performance information is readily available to divisional officers. That tasking coordinator meeting is also then supplemented by, we do and you've heard as a authority the operational orders we do specific for bank holiday weekends, which we know are times when we would see high death and serious injury on our roads, and we have reported to you on that about the information-led evidence base, and we are seeing actually the more positive outcomes on bank holiday weekends with reduced road deaths at that time, but obviously overall road deaths are up. And then we do specific days, for example, when we do slow down days, when we focus on speed. So that's the national structure. And then with the information, the performance information that we give, then the PAF process is then how performance is monitored in the, firstly through the Deputy Commissioner McMahon's PAF, through the regional AC PAFs, down to divisional officers who have that information. So we very much use, we have a full-time roads policing analyst, and he produces those reports on a monthly basis so people can see what is happening in their respective division.
Thanks, Paula, for that. That's very helpful in terms of setting out the structure, in terms of governance, and we know, from a number of years ago that there have been significant improvements in the governance around roads policing. It's still a complicated picture in terms of whose responsibility it is, and where responsibility and accountability actually lies. But I know that you and your colleagues are working through that. There's a number of bits you've said there in terms of you providing the data through your tasking and coordinating meetings, and then that goes to PAF and they use that data. And maybe you're not the one to talk to this, but how is that information, how is that data then transformed into information and used locally, regionally and within divisions?
Mm-hmm.
Both in terms of the patterns and trends, and in terms of fatalities, those have been fairly stable for many years in terms of young drivers, particularly men, mainly rural rather than urban, and so on. So maybe someone could talk us through how that data is used regionally and within divisions.
I'll pass it on over to Cliona, but just before I do it, was just to say that what happens is that each of the regional representatives then go back and also have meetings as well, and very much, and it is, I just want to highlight before I pass over to Cliona, it is a very much collaborative approach. We don't just say, here you go, and that's it. We're talking to one another all the time. We talked recently, like Cliona had meetings about, and we're talking to herself and Sean Collar and and we're working together to look at how we can help each other. So I want to make it clear, it's very much collaborative approach about what can we do, can we get, how can we task the non-intercept, the safety camera vans, can we help with that, do we need to do that, do you need equipment? So we do work very, very closely, but maybe in terms of just how operational PAF meetings operate, maybe, yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Paula. And yes, as Paula said, the one thing is really collaborative between the national unit and ourselves and in the regional, and as Paula unfortunately said as well, two of my divisions would appear, at the moment as being high with unfortunate road deaths. And it's been very important to me in relation to it from a regional point of view to ensure that that information that does come from the Road Traffic Bureau through the liaison chief is discussed first of all at the PAF meetings. So there's a specific emphasis put on every regional PAF meeting in relation to the figures around the road deaths, where they're occurring, where we can actually proactively try and discourage, and can we put in both, I suppose, short-term and focused checkpoints and enforcement pieces in certain areas where there may have been a difficulty. I know a couple of months ago we had one particular area, and over the period of 2 weekends we had unfortunately 2 fatal road traffics quite near to each other. And for the next 3 or 4 weeks we put intensive patrolling and intensive checkpoints in around there to target that behaviour. We also then go and try and target it proactively around, and again it's coming back to that collaborative approach between community policing in relation to going out to the community, to sports groups, giving information days, you know, giving seminars and briefings around road safety and the use of the roads and how the roads are using and how the impact that and how a driver, a young driver or you know, any age driver could actually impact on their driving. And again, it's that collaborative approach between all the different units, but also then interacting with the regions beside me as well and the divisions beside me. And I know, because my region is quite diverse, that we would have 2 divisions. So we say I'd have a weekend where I'd have 2 divisions, so Donegal, Sligo, Leitrim, in conjunction with Cavan Monaghan, or with Mayo, Roscommon, and try and have that corridor, those main roads, targeted to ensure that there's a visible road presence, in relation to it. I think another important thing to me, and I emphasise to my chiefs, and they bring it back down to between their paths and down to the briefings to the sergeants on the lower ground, is in relation to roads policing. It isn't just an issue for a roads policing unit. It's actually every member that's on the road, that's out working, whether they're on the beat, whether they're on in car duty, that it's their responsibility as well if they see driver behaviour, or if they see particularly lifesaver offences, that they do intervene, that it's not just left and it's not seen as just being left to a roads policing unit. And I think that's really important. That's one of the messages that we do try and get down between the PAFS meetings.
And how are you assured then of you know, a consistent approach across your divisions? You know, there's an issue nationally as well, but you know, we're talking about your region, and how do you assure yourself in terms of that sort of consistency, both in terms of divisional approach and indeed individuals?
Well, again, then it's down to supervision. It's down to ensuring that that it's been on, that it's focused on the PAFS.
I'm asking how you get that assurance. You know, what's the mechanism for divisions?
Well, it comes back in relation to figures, in relation to detections. Sometimes detections may not actually reflect the actual operations that are ongoing as well, because there's obviously, you know, the community policing piece as well. But I would get the briefings every month. I get the briefings every morning in relation to what figures, what road offence, what lifesaver offences. So I'm monitoring those in relation to ensuring that if there is a trend emerging, that we try and go that trend. But again, it's all that collaborative piece, both between Paula's unit, my own unit and my own chiefs, and then down to the supers and the inspectors on the ground in Garda.
Okay, thanks, Leona. So,
Thank you.
Paula, why do you think that the detections, the performance is down across the board in this way this year so far? Or is there any sign that, you know, you might have updated figures, any sign of that recovery?
I would say, and if we look across some of the types, and just to add, just before I move on to the question itself, as Cliona said, it's just to give it the breakdown. On average, it's across the lifesaver offences, with the exception of the driving with intoxication, it's about 3/4 of the detections are by roads policing, and the other quarter are by other units, normally quite our frontline and our community Garda. So it's about 3/4, 1/4. But driving while intoxicated, it actually swings the other way, and it's about nearly two-thirds other units and a third roads policing units. So I think that's probably part of that as well, is the shift pattern as well, and going to road traffic collisions as well would add to that. But just to give you that, I mean, I think when we look right across the board at what we're seeing, while some are detections are less, the biggest decreases are in mobile phone use and seatbelt. You know, if we look at driving whilst intoxicated and drug driving, drug driving is very much nearly on a par and drink driving is just decreased very slightly. So, there are still significant detections being made in those areas. If you look, driving whilst intoxicated overall, from all year we've had 3,335 people detected. Yes, slightly down from last year, 3,400. So there are still significant numbers of people being detected as well. Again, with the drug driving, it is really, it is very much nearly exactly the same. Again, we have thought about this a lot as well in terms of those more significant decreases, because mobile phone use and seatbelt are lifesaver offences. What we have in other jurisdictions, and this is something that again is being discussed with us when we meet the ministers and discussed with the departments, is in other jurisdictions there's the opportunity to be able to use safety cameras to detect those offences as well. So actually, is that something? And as we're looking at procurement for the new procurement contract for safety cameras, again, there'll be a lot of work would be needed. I'm just putting it down that we're looking at other ways that we can do this as well. And also what we are seeing so much now, and this is experience and what we hear from our roads policing members, is actually we're seeing more people, not the offence is holding a mobile phone. What we're seeing now is people watching, having FaceTime messages and calls, people watching sport, and that is actually not, there's no offence of distracted driving. So it is something that we are, we've raised, and certainly at our partnership meetings we have raised that, because the offence is actually holding the mobile phone. So there is something about looking at that as well. But no, we are very much committed to looking at how, and again, it's very much about doing the right thing in terms of these type of offences in the areas where we're seeing both high fatalities and in terms of both, but with some as well, it may be education. An individual guard may stop someone, but they may say, put your seatbelt on. They may not always issue a ticket as well. So there is a visible presence. In terms of speed, again, we're looking at, and I've asked, we've just looking at that, doing everything on a national perspective. I've asked the Chief Super in GNRPB just to run a lens across where we have our handheld devices, just to see, there may not be, but just to give ourselves that assurance. Have we enough devices? Have we the devices in the right places? And we do work really closely at the current safety camera provider in terms of, we had looked, we've increased our number of locations to 1,552, and that is evidence-based, talking to local chiefs where fatalities are happening and where serious injury collisions are happening as well, where we deploy them.
Okay, thanks, Paul. That's very encouraging, and I suppose we all wish you well in making that contribution to decreasing road deaths and increasing activity, and maybe move on tack and ask for very simply an update on where we are with the reserve strategy and the implementation, in terms of we have a strategy, or you have a strategy, and it's been in place for a wee while now. Can you give us an update in terms of the implementation and the timescales? Thank you.
Yeah, that's Paul is again the lead assistant commissioner in respect to the reserve strategy.
Okay, so thank you. Yes. So by way of update, then, our current number of serving reserves are 366, 8 of whom are in Drogheda and locally here. And I know they do. I have been up on a previous visit myself, and I saw how closely they work with the local community policing team up here as well. And I think that's another good example of, I know with one, I won't go into personal circumstances, but I know because of their full-time job, there's a great experience they bring, and they work with the community policing team, going out, adding real value to that. So, that was the piece of work we did around looking at, when I say serving, we did have, and we've done that housekeeping around those. We have a very small number now that haven't worked without good reason. So we know, though, that number is the number who are actively working, which is good. In terms of the strategy, we jointly chair the implementation, myself and the Executive Director of HR, because of the overlap. So much of the implementation sits with HR. So we jointly chair the Garda Reserve Oversight Group. And I would be content that we are working towards everything is being developed and implemented. But just to give you some headlines.
Yeah, so has the role, I know that you were working on clarifying the role, has that work been done? You're just coming down.
Yeah, coming to that, yeah. Yes, so, yes, we are. And so what's happening is it's going to take some changes to the SI, the statutory instruments as well. So some of the work we want to do in terms of the change of role and having more agility to support our Garda Reserve members, but that they have an appropriate portfolio, but working not always with potentially with a full-time member exactly right beside them. So all of that work that we're doing, and we're working with staff associations, and it is very much working with the Department of Justice about when that will be the guidelines will be issued. So that the most recent update for them is they're going to bring that in when they're also looking at bringing in, it'll be part of the Police and Security and Community Safety Bill, so it'll be part of that legislation. So we're looking really at Q1 or Q2 2024. And then that will enable us, because that's why that's why there has been no recruitment until we can get that finalised. So, but myself and the Executive Director of HR, we meet regularly with the department and the developing that. And it has been, again, a very collaborative approach where, again, the Chief Superintendent in Garda National Communication Bureau, Chief Superintendent Jones, brings the operational perspective. So we've got the operational perspective, the policy perspective, and what we need to do to get that work. So that's ongoing, and that's the timeline for that. But what we're doing as well, there's a lot of other, maybe just some of the highlights of some of the good work we're doing as well, and really embedding the Garda Reserves. With in terms of we're looking at the refresher training package. We're looking at their portal page, because one of the things we know, it's really our engagement and communication with them as well, because so update the portal page. We're also as well bringing the reserves into the Garda Safe system, so their shoulder numbers, so they will be exactly the same with the CAD2 project as well. So when they're on duty, they'll be logged on in that way. And the work we did as part of the oversight, monitoring their hours, so we don't get back to the same position that we did with a lot of them not working. So that's all being done lifetime now, and we're really just finishing the policy document was published as you're aware. It was published at the start of the year. So everything is really, if we got the new guidelines, the new instructions for that will really allow us then to further develop and hopefully, subject to Commissioner and budgets, put out a recruitment campaign next year.
Thank you very much. Commissioner.
If I might just add, the change to the original regulation is important to us because it's too restrictive, and we just felt it was important going forward. Like we would like this to be a vehicle for people who may not have considered a career in policing and in Garda Síochána to see what we're like and enter, and we'd want to target our recruitment. Gaeltacht area is one area, but particularly then maybe the more deprived areas of the city, etc. But at the same time, people come in, we really want them to feel as if they're making a contribution, and the regulation at the moment is too restrictive. So an important element of this is actually a new regulation around how they're used, and then we can use them to the maximum benefit. We'd see them then as being part of our community policing response and being able to provide that bit of local knowledge. But I do think there's a route in for us here, as I mentioned already, the Gaeltacht, but also around the diversity of the organisation as well. We're really awaiting this change, and then we can move forward. And the commitment then is just around equipment, which will be grand. I genuinely mean that, and then the training time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And just, Commissioner, I wonder if I can just touch for a moment on the earlier issue in relation to roads policing that Debbie has been engaging on with Paula. You received an anonymous letter, so did we, which seemed to be on the face of it from a concerned individual within the organisation. And it has since been the subject of some media attention. Did you recognise anything in that, or was any of it a source of concern to you? And how do you reassure yourself about that what was alleged or what was suggested in it is not the case?
Thank you. I did read it with some concern. We have taken the view that it should be assessed for the potential of being a protected disclosure, even though it's been written in anonymity. And whoever wrote the letter, I would ask if they have those serious concerns to raise, to actually either raise them yourselves or raise them directly to my office, so we can further examine the allegations. Both Paul and Clean have set out a lot of the governance that there is around roads policing performance. I did satisfy myself by unannounced visits on various individuals and to examine, in effect, that week's performance framework meetings, and so could see, as of live time, what was been done to examine the performance, the returns, etc. There's also then allegations in respect of behaviours within that, and I think then we're going to have to look to those as well in terms of how those are addressed. It's very difficult when they give no indication as to date, time and place, but at the same time they are of sufficient concern that as we work through this, we want to be assured ourselves that the practices that they're setting out, and indeed some of the behaviours that they allege, aren't happening. And so we're treating it very seriously, and it's brought a renewed focus on roads policing performance overall as well. I'll just maybe add to some of what Paul was saying earlier. We also have to look to our deployment and see, have we changed the deployment of roads policing in the last 4 years, and just then what their and has that inadvertently had an impact on their performance in terms of what else they're required to do, what other duties that they've picked up in addition, and if needs be then address that, so we're freeing up their time to be proactive around their detections. Detections do make a difference in road safety. It's another one of these things, it's hard to say, X of this will mean Y of that, but at the same time we are seeing increased numbers of people who very tragically are down on our roads, and that's set against fallen profile in terms of the lifesaver offences, and they're called lifesaver for a reason. And Paul has already set out some of the, I think, appropriate legislative changes that we would seek in respect of roads policing, and including average speed cameras, for instance, as well. There's far too many people going too hard on the roads, as it is. Thank you.
Nature of that response. Before asking Elaine Byrne to open the next and final section of the meeting, could I raise with you two issues that are not at all unconnected, quite connected to the theme of conduct and disciplinary processes that Elaine will be engaging with, and you and I have spoken about both of these previously. The first is in relation to a High Court decision upholding a suspension of a serving sergeant in respect of a charge of drunk driving. Now, I make no comment whatsoever in relation to that. That's for the court. But was it a source of surprise or of concern to you that two separate considerations of this by chief superintendents didn't think a suspension was warranted?
In the end, the determination was that suspension was warranted in that case, and the judgment, in effect, has been upheld through a JR process, which shows the soundness of the decision making. I think for me, there is the ongoing importance of highlighting behaviour which is, in effect, I might say, beyond appeal, and has to be considered then in terms of whether we can continue to have, trust in an individual whilst they're under investigation to remain on duty. So if I move away, if I might move away from the particular case to say we have put considerable effort into reinforcing the necessary behaviours required of members of Garda Síochána. We are in a place of very implicit and explicit trust in what we do. We're responsible for upholding the rule of law, and therefore then if an individual Garda member is alleged to have committed an offence, we obviously then look at the circumstances of that and to see then is that individual deserving of the trust to stay on in the workplace. Now, we have primary and secondary considerations. We have a process by which we liaise then with their chief superintendent, but in the end I have a responsibility to make sure there's a corporate framework and a corporate decision-making policy applied to that. And it may be that I come to a different conclusion because I'm entitled to come to a different conclusion because I have a wider perspective on public confidence in the organisation. And this is about public confidence in Garda Síochána, in that the public should have every trust in ourselves in terms of our application of the rule of law and the individual Garda members that they're going to come across should they seek assistance from this organisation. In terms of the specific responsibilities of a chief superintendent, they are onerous. Training has taken place. And there are, in effect, the feedback mechanisms in terms of the decision that's been made and the rationale in respect of that. And I think over time there is perhaps a cultural and behaviour piece there that just has to be further trained and inculcated into the organisation as we go forward. We do not have a pro-suspension policy or anywhere near it. We make careful and balanced decisions. There's no such thing as arbitrary suspension. We apply primary and secondary considerations, but we do have factors that we legitimately take into consideration, and it can be a complex and indeed difficult decision, but ultimately we have to protect the public and also we have to protect public confidence in Garda Síochána.
Thanks, Helen. Thank you for that. The second question relates to recent court proceedings in which an apology was given by your legal representatives on your behalf to Mr. Pat Carey, a former member of the government, in relation to events that took place a number of years ago. That was in effect an inappropriate leak of confidential information. And were there any consequences, or was it appropriately investigated, and were there any consequences for anybody arising from it?
I have satisfied myself as to the thoroughness of the investigation, and there is a lot that was learnt during that investigation, but we were unable then to identify an individual in effect to recommend the prosecution to the DPP, because it was a breach of data protection legislation and perhaps the Garda Síochána Act itself. So there was insufficient evidence that was found to do that and report to the DPP. But at the same time, there was a rigorous investigation mounted, and perhaps if I write to you separately just to set out what was done and what was discovered in respect of that. But if it was appropriate, might I take the opportunity to reiterate the apology to Mr. Carey, because I appreciate the apology was given in court, and that can seem like quite a sterile environment, but just again, just to express my sincere apology. I absolutely recognise it as being had a very severe and wholly unjustifiable impact in terms of distress on Mr. Carey and indeed those close to him. And you are correct, it was entirely an unauthorised and indeed uncontrolled leak of information which damaged the integrity of the investigation and damaged wider public confidence in Garda Síochána to conduct such an investigation. So wholly inappropriate, and it was appropriate then to apologise to Mr. Carey in court proceedings, and I'm glad to be able to take this opportunity to reiterate that apology now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And over to Elaine Byrne.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any casual observer would note that there are increased number of media reports concerning former members of the Garda Síochána or current members of Garda Síochána around alleged behaviours and behaviours that have gone through a court process, and those behaviours are deeply problematic. They include domestic violence, sexual misconduct, assault, improper association, driving under the influence. And it is understandable, therefore, that members of the public are concerned at this increased regularity of Garda members whose job it is to investigate crime are themselves the subject of criminal investigation. But it can also be said, Commissioner, that there is a cultural change happening in Garda Síochána where certain behaviours that were traditionally swept under the carpet are now being brought into the light. And what do you have to say to reassure the public about the issues around discipline and conduct within Garda Síochána?
Well, I believe I'm on record, and if I haven't explicitly said, I can take the opportunity now that we have no tolerance for criminal behaviour by members of Garda Síochána, none whatsoever. These matters, when reported to us, are properly investigated and reported then to the Director of Public Prosecutions. And I can give the public every assurance in terms of the quality, depth and the professionalism of the work that's undertaken by the Anti-Corruption Unit and indeed the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation in respect of this. We leave no stone unturned, carry out very thorough investigation and indeed are very intrusive actually into the quality of the work that happens, and these matters are reported. I would say, just following on perhaps just from the earlier comments in respect of domestic abuse, coercive control, that there can be victims within our organisation, and there can be victims who are subject of such crime by members of Garda Síochána. And again, I would appeal to them to come forward and to report what's happening to them. Additionally, they can also report to the Garda Ombudsman, and they should do that. And I would appeal to them to do that. Again, to report starts the process by which these matters then can be dealt with. I think as well, we just need to look at this in an international perspective. The greatest risk for us as an organisation is actually in effect to try and sweep this under the carpet. The far better thing for the public good in terms of just us as a police service and community confidence and public confidence in Garda Síochána, which is good in itself, is that we're seen to be tackling these issues head on, taking them seriously, and where necessary then successfully reporting these matters to the Director of Public Prosecution. So for the Director of Public Prosecution then to decide on the appropriate action in respect of prosecution. So that's the best place for us to be. We have to recognise that this is a possibility and that when allegations are made, we have to investigate them properly and see them through.
You made reference there to Gardaí themselves being subject of domestic violence or coercive control. There was a Casey review, as you know, into the Met Police in London. There's currently a review by the Department of, or the Minister for Defence on the Defence Forces here. Was a similar review by the PSNI and Police Scotland about misogyny in the workplace. Has any consideration been given whether similar interventions are needed in the Garda Síochána? I'm mindful, for example, that the Casey review said that the Met was institutionally misogynistic.
Well, if I might just consider that in terms of what we've already done, and you know, the fact of representation throughout the organisation in terms of female representation, and in particular, might I say, in senior, very senior leadership roles as well within Garda Síochána. Our senior leadership team is 50-50 split in terms of gender, and I think that sends out a powerful message about what Garda Síochána is in terms of a workplace. But neither are we complacent in respect of this, and we've put huge effort into investigation, but we've also done a lot of outreach to our own staff. We've put a lot of expertise into the investigation of things like domestic abuse and coercive control, and therefore then what the proper behaviours are in the workplace. Now, and as you highlighted earlier on, it is a fact that individuals are going through the courts and are being convicted as well, and then are dealt with through our discipline process. So I think our approach to this has put us, might I say, ahead of the curve in comparison to where others have been. But there are learnings for us in the Baroness Casey review which we do take seriously. But I'm thankful I'm Commissioner here, not Commissioner in London, I would say.
So you don't think that a similar intervention is needed here in relation to a review around women within Garda Síochána and their experience of being a police officer?
So I've had the fortune of hearing Baroness Casey speak, and I'm not sure that a review of the kind that was done in Met would make sense here for a whole bunch of reasons. One of the things she said that really struck with me was that the key indicator for her in terms of whether this kind of a review would be necessary was the refusal to look at it, meaning institutional blindness or arrogance to the issue. And so we're on a journey. This is something that we've been talking about long before any of these reviews came to the fore. We've done a lot of work in this space, and we're putting together a comprehensive report that I expect to be done by the end of this year, just to show the sheer number of things that we've done. And we're certainly open to continuing on this journey. And I think that because of the work that's been done, it wouldn't make sense to do so. Having said that, I do think it's important that we keep having these conversations, and not just for the sake of having them, but actually looking at risks and identifying where patterns emerge so that we can be moving on them as quickly as possible.
Okay, so you're assured then that the behaviours that have been identified in the Met and the Irish Defence Forces are not as prevalent on Garda Síochána?
I don't think there's ever a way to be 100% assured, and I think that actually that's the reason that I feel that at this time we wouldn't need a review, meaning that we're very aware that it always could be possible. Could we have someone out there in our organization that is behaving in a way that is inappropriate? Absolutely. But we continue to put in place systems, processes, and I mean, that sounds like we're talking about structural things. We're talking about actually helping people in terms of being able to come forward and do the right thing.
Cultural changes.
Cultural changes, yeah, and I would actually call them cultural enhancements in some way. And I say this because what really struck me in terms of the conversation we were having before about the fact that we don't tolerate criminal behavior for a whole bunch of reasons. I can say that most of the people I speak with within Garda Síochána are very proud of the work that they do, and they don't have tolerance for it either. And to have the ability to be able to report anonymously and other things that we've put in place are actually very important to them, because they want to be able to come forward and to say these things are happening and to see action taking place. And that's the piece that's really important here.
And on that, I know that in previous discussions we've had that there is a trend where there is an option of officers to report anonymously. A lot of people aren't. They're standing over their allegations, they're putting their name to them, and that in itself is a cultural change, because people are not afraid to put their name to their concerns about members of their colleagues and other members around them and their behaviour. If we were to sit here this time next year, what milestones in discipline and conduct do you think we would be reviewing that have occurred in the last year?
Well, We have ongoing work to do in terms of the anti-corruption unit, and obviously then we'll have a new police ombudsman by then as well. I think we'd like to have moved forward further with the piece around training for panel members, and then also then training for the appeal board. So the panel members, some 30 odd members split between chief supers and supers. That training to take place very shortly, and then that'll be followed then by further training for the appeal board members. We've conducted this training before, but now we're concentrating, trying to concentrate the specialism in one area, doing something different. Drugs testing, I've mentioned, ombudsman, there's one other thing.
In-service vetting.
In-service vetting, and we would like a legislative backstop to conduct some of the inquiries, which I think would be appropriate in respect of that. But again, that is under development, and we know the route we would like to go. But there is a piece there, you know, around just the financial health of individuals as well, and obviously then you are delving into information of a good deal more privacy, which we wouldn't have access to normally, and so I do think we do need some form of legislative background for that.
So what's your time frame then, Commissioner? When do you see in-service vetting realistically being implemented and rolled out across in Garda Síochána?
Well, there are things we know because we are the guards and matters are reported to us, and there's also then things we know around matters that we've investigated and actually have they've fallen in terms of just proofs either to the DPP or indeed at discipline, and that can have an impact further down the line in terms of an individual's deployment. And I just sort of think some of our areas where individual Garda members are dealing with victims who are particularly vulnerable, that's one of the first areas we'd need to protect. There's obviously the issues around our national security responsibilities and all of that, but a lot of our risk actually lies with the vulnerable that we are constantly in contact with in an organisational sense there.
And you mentioned drug testing there. Can you give an update on the progress as to when that will be rolled out?
So our first rollout on this is going to begin this summer with respect to those who are applying to work within Garda Síochána. So we're going to, we intend to do that.
So the next batch of recruits?
Yeah, we're intending to do that over the course of the summer, so before the end of the summer to commence it. And that'll help us to work out the details of how it will work. And then after that, we will look at and consider the staging for the next piece in terms of internal. We're not there yet. We're starting with this phase only.
Okay. And do you see any challenges in the rollout of drug testing?
Yeah, we've had ongoing engagement with the associations. It's a big change for the organization. We have not finalized the policy yet. It's been a work in progress for quite some time. Having said that, we've certainly heard the concerns that have been brought forward, and some of the other pieces that go with it are actually more technical issues with respect to how it will work, and so those are the pieces that we're really dealing with right now, that and the policy, because they go together. Okay.
And Commissioner, you spoke with the chair there around the judicial review that was before the courts, and I want to talk to you a little bit now about suspension policy within Garda Síochána. I know that your suspension policy is being reviewed and redrafted, and I understand as well that there are disciplinary regulations being new disciplinary regulations being introduced. What gaps are there in the new version of the that your policy is trying to fill?
The suspension policy specifically, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have, as was mentioned earlier, we have primary considerations and secondary considerations. So actually what we want to do with respect to the update in the policy is really to clarify some of the issues that have come to the fore in the last couple of years. At the same time, it's really critical to understand that there have been a couple of judicial reviews around and decisions around suspension specifically, as well as other decisions, whether by appeal boards or through a JR process, that we need to put into it so that chiefs can understand at their level what they have to consider. It's fairly comprehensive now. It's really an update to put all of those things into the policy itself, and also to help chiefs in terms of are they applying the grounds in the way that they should be, and are they doing it in the timely manner that it needs to occur within.
And can you explain to me a little bit more about timely manner?
Yeah, so short-term suspensions are done by the chiefs, and then long-term suspensions, it moves up to the assistant commissioner. Having said that, when we're looking at primary and secondary considerations, it all has to do with what is known about, usually it's one significant incident, what is known about it, or the series of incidents that have led to suspension considerations. So because it's grounded in evidence, in terms of the decision that we make, we need to get what evidence is available, and so the timeliness piece is around what evidence is available, and what do we need to consider, and what are we still waiting on, and what does that look like?
Because one of the key recommendations of the Casey review, as you know, was that it took too long in the Met to conduct those suspension inquiries, and certain behaviours tended not to be a consequence of suspension. So is that a concern you might have here about it just takes too long for suspensions?
Yes and no. It depends on the circumstances, because we really do need to look at each one individually, and we do have to consider the individual circumstances. What is good here is it is centralized through the assistant commissioner, so we're able to get a line of sight on both suspensions that have gone forward as well as ones that are being considered. So it's certainly an area we need to work on. I'm not going to say we're 100% there, but it is a consideration and part of what we're looking at with respect to the policy.
Okay. And just a final question, Commissioner, are you happy that you have sufficient tools in your armoury for discipline and conduct with Garda Síochána?
I think there are things that certainly could further enhance our approach to, I think, really, gross misconduct. And where we are at the moment, we're probably over-reliant on criminal convictions as opposed to being able to deal directly then with behaviour which we regarded as being entirely inappropriate and in effect really an egregious breach of conduct, and it may not actually meet the criminal threshold. So the new regulations that we've seen a very initial draft of those and provided initial feedback to the department. I think they're a significant enhancement in what we have at the moment, and just we look forward to working with the department around the further development of those. And I do think they will provide a more rounded approach to the most serious cases, and whilst at the same time a performance-type regime run in tandem, and in effect we keep the conduct regulations for the most egregious, serious breaches and deal with other matters in terms of performance there. So I do think that's going to be a considerable advance forward in where we are at this moment in time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Commissioner, and to your colleagues. Thank you for a very comprehensive range of responses, some very significant ones. This was an interesting balance in today's meeting of local policing issues and national policing issues. Some of the local issues with national significance, some of the national issues with local application. And our visit to Drogheda has been a very important one for us. And I want to express again, reiterate our appreciation of the support and welcome we have been given, the openness of very many people to engage with our colleagues on the executive in advance of this meeting as part of a continuous outreach to get a deeper insight into the views of communities and those who work on behalf of people who are disadvantaged and who are affected by many of the issues we've spoken about. To reiterate again the appreciation of the Garda colleagues who made presentations to us yesterday and engaged in open conversation with us. To my colleagues on the authority, including Donald Butler, who's with us electronically. And to express appreciation as well for a meeting that the Chief Executive and I had this morning with the Chair, Michael Keogh, and the Coordinator, Gráinne Beryl, of the Implementation Board. Much to be reflected on from all of those conversations, significant achievements in this area, significant outcomes, and a great deal to be reflected on in terms of their wider application, both for policing and also for the authority in its work, and the work of our successors when the new Policing and Community Safety Authority comes into existence. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. This meeting has now ended.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah, I'd get lots of room to...
Yeah. Are you doing media?
No, I think what she's saying is there's someone in the audience who's trying to do something and...
Politicians left, Boris left. And they did. They left.